Sudan is breaking apart. Gunfire, starvation, entire cities emptied in days. What began as a power struggle between two armed groups has turned into one of the fastest-moving collapses the world has seen in years. The strange part is how quickly the devastation spread. Frontlines shifted with unexpected force. A weakened militia suddenly gained drones, artillery, and the firepower to overrun entire regions. Every major turning point carried the same signature. Someone was feeding this war from outside Sudan. And as investigators traced the weapons, the money, and the gold leaving the country, a new picture began to form, one that leads directly into the Gulf. So it begs one question that can't be ignored. Why would a foreign nation start a war that's destroying Sudan from the inside out? Well, let's uncover it all, the war that should have ended. Sudan's collapse didn't begin with foreign drones or gold smuggling routes. It began on the streets of Khartoum in April 2023, when a power struggle inside the military spiraled into open war between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces. What started as a dispute over military integration quickly swallowed the capital. Apartment blocks turned into battle positions. Hospitals went dark. Families escaped through streets filled with smoke and checkpoints. By the end of the first month, Khartoum was a battlefield with no front lines left to stabilize. The fighting pushed deeper into Bari and Omdurman, forcing nearly 1 million people out of the capital. The chaos spread faster than humanitarian agencies could respond. Markets collapsed, water systems failed, and entire neighborhoods were left without food for days at a time. In Darfur, the situation became even more brutal. Local towns saw large-scale killings, particularly in El Geneina, where thousands died as militias swept through Masalit communities. The region had lived through atrocities before, and now many feared those same patterns were returning in full force. By late 2024, aid groups were calling it one of the worst civilian crises of the decade. At this point, both armed groups were bleeding territory. Ammunition was drying up. Supply lines were stretched. Analysts expected the fighting to slow because neither side had the resources to keep advancing. Sudan was starving, exhausted, and running out of time. Instead, the war expanded. RSF units launched new offensives. More towns fell, and the violence intensified in places that had barely been touched months before. El Fasher, Niala, and parts of Kordofan. It raised a question inside every humanitarian briefing and intelligence report. How was a militia battered by months of fighting suddenly moving with renewed strength? Where were the new weapons coming from? What changed? Those questions marked the first signs that Sudan's war was no longer fueled only from within its borders. Someone outside was keeping the conflict alive. The RSF Group and its sponsors. To understand why Sudan's collapse accelerated, you have to understand the group driving most of the destruction, the Rapid Support Forces. The RSF didn't emerge during this war. Their roots go back to the early 2000s, when the Sudanese government armed Arab militias in Darfur, known as the Janjaweed, to crush a local rebellion. Those militias became infamous for village burnings, mass killings, and widespread displacement across West Darfur. The International Criminal Court later described many of these campaigns as crimes against humanity. From those militias came a young camel trader turned commander named Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemedti. In 2013, his fighters were formalized as the Rapid Support Forces, given uniforms and salaries. Yet they operated outside the army's chain of command. By the time Sudan's revolution toppled Omar al-Bashir in 2019, the RSF had evolved into a parallel state. They controlled gold mines in Darfur, moved money through companies tied to the Gulf, and sent thousands of fighters to Yemen, deepening their ties with the UAE and expanding into policing and intelligence roles at home. So, when war erupted in 2023, the RSF entered the conflict with decentralized units, smuggling networks, and commanders used to guerrilla-style fighting. Their attacks followed familiar patterns: mass killings in El Geneina, executions in Artamata, and targeted violence against non-Arab communities. With new foreign firepower, their reach only grew. The main reason being gold. Nearly all of it came from areas the RSF controlled, especially the Jebel Amir mines, ground they took through deals, pressure, and force. Once they held it, a quiet network of traders and smugglers pushed the gold across Chad and Libya, all the way to Dubai. The UAE became their biggest buyer, turning raw gold into steady cash. That money paid fighters, bought vehicles, and built influence far beyond Sudan's borders. How? Well, analysts tracked a series of cargo flights landing in Amjaras, a remote town in eastern Chad located near the Sudanese border. The flights were publicly described as aid missions from the UAE. But what happened next raised questions. UN experts documented convoys leaving the airstrip and moving toward RSF-held routes in Darfur. Witness accounts, satellite imagery, and open-source investigations indicated that these shipments included small arms, machine guns, anti-armor weapons, and ammunition. The most alarming reports pointed to Chinese-made CH-4 and CH-5 drones, long-endurance strike drones capable of surveillance and precision attacks, appearing over Sudanese battlefields shortly after these deliveries. These weapons didn't stay on the ground for long. They were quickly deployed in offensives across Darfur and Kordofan, shifting battles that had previously been stalemates. In several instances, the introduction of drones coincided with RSF advances against entrenched army positions, breaking sieges or capturing bases that had held for months. The routes weren't limited to Chad. Regional officials and independent researchers also pointed to networks passing through Libya and, in some cases, Somalia. All of them led toward RSF territory through corridors historically used for smuggling and unofficial trade. Throughout this period, the UAE publicly denied supplying weapons and insisted the flights were humanitarian. But the pattern observed by investigators remained consistent. As cargo flights increased, RSF firepower increased. And it got worse and worse. But why does the UAE want Sudan weak? Power and the Red Sea. Foreign involvement in Sudan's war isn't driven by ideology or alliances. It's driven by interests, and few countries have more at stake inside Sudan than the United Arab Emirates. Long before the fighting erupted in 2023, the UAE was deeply embedded in Sudan's economy, particularly in sectors that thrive when regulation is weak: gold, farmland, and ports. When the war broke out, these interests became more valuable. Gold is the clearest example. Sudan is Africa's third-largest gold producer, and investigators consistently place the UAE as the primary buyer of this gold, much of it unregulated or smuggled. RSF-controlled mines in Darfur supply a significant portion of this trade, giving the group direct access to the UAE's gold market. This is the backbone of the RSF's financing. As long as gold flows to Dubai, the RSF maintains a steady source of hard currency. But the UAE's motives extend far beyond minerals. Sudan holds vast, fertile farmland, something the UAE relies on as a major food importer. For more than a decade, Emirati companies have acquired large agricultural plots across Sudan, particularly in areas where the RSF maintains influence. These projects depend on stability for UAE-linked farms, but not necessarily stability for Sudan as a whole. They require protection from local partners, and the RSF has played that role in several regions. The most strategic interest, however, lies on the Red Sea. Sudan's coastline offers access to one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. Before the war, the UAE negotiated multi-billion-dollar deals for port development and free trade zones. Some of these agreements stalled or were canceled by shifting Sudanese governments. A friendly authority, especially one dependent on the UAE, could revive them. Regional politics also shape Abu Dhabi's calculations. While Saudi Arabia leans toward the Sudanese army, the UAE has built long-standing ties with Hemeti and the RSF from their years of cooperation in Yemen. Supporting the RSF strengthens the UAE's influence in the Horn of Africa and counters rival powers vying for the same strategic corridor. Together, these factors create a clear picture. Sudan's instability serves interests that stretch far beyond its borders. As evidence of foreign involvement mounted, a natural question began to circulate in diplomatic circles and humanitarian briefings. If investigators can trace the weapons, the money, and the gold routes, why isn't anyone stopping them? Why no one stops the UAE's influence in Sudan? Well, the answer isn't simple. It sits at the intersection of global politics, regional alliances, and the uncomfortable reality that powerful nations rarely confront partners they depend on. The UAE occupies a central position in global finance, shipping, and counterterrorism cooperation. Many Western governments view it as a strategic ally, one that hosts military bases, invests heavily in European and American markets, and plays a key role in Gulf security. Publicly confronting Abu Dhabi over its role in Sudan risks straining relationships that major powers rely on for their own regional agendas. There is also a structural problem. Sudan is not a headline priority for most governments. As crises in Ukraine, Gaza, and the Red Sea escalate, Sudan's war often slips to the background. Diplomatic attention becomes fragmented, and enforcement of arms embargoes, especially in remote border regions, receives limited resources. Even when UN reports document violations, follow-up is slow and consequences are rare. Regional politics complicate matters further. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE each back different actors inside Sudan, creating a quiet standoff where no state wants to escalate tensions with another Gulf power. Efforts to pressure one country often risk undermining cooperation with another. As a result, negotiations stall, ceasefires collapse, and the diplomatic effort resets every few months. Meanwhile, the networks sustaining the RSF operate outside conventional oversight. Gold shipments pass through informal routes. Cargo flights are labeled as humanitarian missions. Companies that appear on sanctions lists simply shift ownership, rebrand, or operate through new intermediaries. By the time regulators respond, the support has already moved. This combination, global alliances, regional rivalries, and flexible financial networks, creates a space where responsibility is dispersed and accountability is limited. And inside that space, Sudan's war continues to grow, fueled by support that many governments acknowledge privately but struggle to confront publicly. So, what happens if UAE support continues? The aftermath. If the flow of weapons, money, and gold networks into the RSF continues, Sudan's future becomes easier to predict and far more dangerous. Every assessment from regional analysts, humanitarian agencies, and diplomats points to the same trajectory. A country fragmenting into separate spheres of control, with violence spreading even as state institutions collapse. The most immediate risk is a permanent split. The RSF already holds large parts of Darfur and stretches of central Sudan, while the Sudanese army controls Port Sudan and much of the east. If foreign support keeps strengthening the RSF, these territories could solidify into rival administrations, each claiming legitimacy, each unable to govern beyond its military reach. Sudan would begin resembling other fractured states in the region, where rival militias, foreign patrons, and economic networks shape power more than any central government. Humanitarian consequences would intensify. Food shortages would deepen as farmland remains unsafe. Roads stay cut, and international aid struggles to enter conflict zones. Cholera and other diseases could spread faster in overcrowded displacement camps, where medical supplies are already minimal. With over half the population facing hunger, any escalation risks tipping entire regions into full famine conditions. The conflict could also destabilize neighboring countries. Chad already hosts hundreds of thousands of Sudanese refugees. Further displacement would strain resources across the border. South Sudan, dealing with its own instability, would face increased pressure as people flee fighting in Kordofan and White Nile. Arms trafficking routes passing through Libya and the Sahel could expand, adding volatility to regions already struggling with insurgencies. International shipping lanes would not be immune. Sudan's Red Sea coastline sits near key global trade routes. A prolonged conflict involving foreign actors with competing interests could unsettle maritime security at a time when the region is already experiencing tension from other crises. And within Sudan, A prolonged influx of foreign support would entrench the RSF as a permanent power center, one built on gold revenues, external alliances, and a record of ethnic violence. The longer this system survives, the harder it becomes to rebuild a unified Sudan or create conditions for safe civilian governance. In this scenario, the war doesn't simply continue. It becomes the foundation of a new, fractured reality. So now to you, if one foreign power can quietly reshape the fate of an entire nation, what does that mean for the rest of Africa's future? Comment down below as you leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.